Welcome back to episode 2 of our full disclosure series on Hope and Healing Chats. I'm your host, Monifa Elisadi, joined by disclosure specialists Dan Drake and Janice Caudill. Last time, we explored the pros and cons of full disclosure. Today, we're unpacking the fears both partners and addicts face when considering this critical step. But first, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated. Let's get started. So one thing I want to touch on is, what if the addict's fear does come true? They've gone through this whole process, and then do you ever see that sometimes the partner does come up with the decision of, I do want to walk away? How do we approach that? Or is the goal always like, let's keep this together?
No, I could just say from on my end that's part of the preparation. That's part of the sort of informed consent per se, which is you might learn information that will make it very hard for you to stay in this relationship. So I build that into the process of preparing. Now, I've never had a partner. I don't think I have. No, I haven't. Who's like, on the heels of the disclosure said, okay, ended the relationship. I have had partners who ultimately ended it because really, you're coming out of surgery, right after a disclosure. So there's some time to grieve and discern. Really, I've had many partners who were very ambivalent about staying or going. They thought it would be really nice and clear, and it turns out it's not nice and clear. And what I think they're really doing is they're waiting on the back end of the disclosure. The disclosure process really extends, past the disclosure itself. And I like to think of that's for somebody, for an addict who's really willing to, now ready to do the work to heal and help his partner heal. That's the beginning of the empathy process. And so what I see is partners really discerning, how's he responding afterward? Is it being flipped back on me, even though, he didn't do X, Y, Z? Or is it falling back on me, even though he did something so egregious? So there's a lot of real self-examination. And I've had more in the last few years who've decided to end a relationship, but never directly as a result of the disclosure itself. It's always been if there's like still lies afterward, if there's like no empathy and no attempt at empathy, if they see no growth with that's usually what's the final straw.
I was going to say that too, Janice. I mean, I have seen it where someone's walked away right after disclosure, but I think it's rare when that happens. I'm trying to think. I do think there are sometimes content, areas of the content where they might be deal breakers for the partner, and they just say, "Oh, you've crossed a line where I can't recover from."
Yeah.
I've seen that. More often than not, though, I would definitely say what you said, Janice. It's not usually the content of the disclosure. And I've been through some really intense, difficult, extreme disclosures, and it wasn't the content that ultimately was the deciding factor for the partner to walk away. It was usually the behavioral truth. The addict not really working on getting it. They're checking boxes, but they're still, being aggressive, passive aggressive. They're self-focused. They're not really doing the work. They're not trying to help the partner heal. They're, all those things that they're still lying about stuff. They're still gaslighting or blame shifting. So I've usually seen when it's that, it's usually continued. And I say this to everybody. I've had, I don't know how many versions of this from partners where they've said, I can handle the truth. What I can't handle is continued lies and deception from you, some version of that. And usually what I find kills a relationship isn't the content of the disclosure, it's the continued lies through and after disclosure. That's what I found does it.
No, and I concur. Absolutely. Anytime I have seen it broken up, and it doesn't happen often, it's not the disclosure itself. So the addict's fears around, this is the thing that's going to break everything up. It's actually not the thing that's going to break it up. This is just like a process, like, something that we're doing to get everything down in black and white. But it's their process, their behavioral truth is the thing that ends up breaking up the marriage, because that's the thing that we're building off of.
Yeah.
That's what's actually makes up the marriage, not the content. Shifting gears a little bit. Now, what about for the betrayed partners that are like, What's the point? They lie all the time anyway. They're just going to lie through this disclosure. They're so cunning that they're going to trick
Mhm.
the therapist, and I'm not going to get anywhere with this. Will a full disclosure help with that?
Well, that might end up, that's a realistic possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I might say, what do you have right now? And, let's just look at this logically. The possibility of some content truth, but behavioral truth will either prove you're right, or it might be that you might learn that no, something's actually changing in him. Like something about the process of preparing for the disclosure. Because I think a lot of people think that the disclosure is just for the partner. There's good old fashioned shame work, breaking through denial. There's all kinds of work that the prep alone does for the addict in his or her recovery. And so sometimes we actually see, it's not uncommon that I see real recovery doesn't begin for the addict until after the disclosures. So
Mm-hmm.
that's so where are we going to bet on for this? And if that's your choice, then what do you do with that? If you choose not to do it, what do you do with that? How does that serve you? So I'm always taking it back to the partner. What do you learn from this? How does that serve you? And then with some of them, I do say, is there any possibility that he's betting that you're going to back off? And I just say that because I'm that kind of gal. If I recognize I might be being played to not go through with it, I'm going to say, oh no, wait a second. No, no more. I don't play this. I'm not going to play this game anymore with participating in my own manipulation.
Anything to add to that, Dan?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say on what Janice is saying, I mean, I could go through, if I'm preparing the disclosing person, I could go 10 plus revisions of a document.
Yeah.
And that's not just crafting a document. To Janice's point, that's also where I get to say, I'm seeing this point where you say I did this, but it was only once. That might
Yep.
sound subtle and small, but I'm saying when you use the word only, you're minimizing, or there's subtle
Or
blame
passive
shifting
language,
or passive language, or all these
because
things that,
yeah.
yeah, all these things that we're adding in there that we'll see, or qualifying terms or context, but that's really trying to soften the blow or try to shift blame or try, I've had situations, people are paint the story where it looks like they're the victim in the story. They were just
Mm-hmm.
passively minding their own business, and then all of a sudden this thing happened, and it's like, no, that we have to change that. That's me. I get to bring that in to the session and say, after we've edited, this is why I'm editing, and you notice this is what you do. Because most likely, if they're putting that into a document that they're writing about disclosure, they're probably doing the same thing with their partner already. So we're now working on these patterns of deflection or minimization or rationalization or distortion of some kind, Darvo, even if it gets even more sophisticated. So that's part of the work. Sometimes it takes if someone's really willing to do it. And then I also had situations where it doesn't feel like someone's actively they are more checking a box. They know they kind of have to do this. That doesn't feel good to me if I don't feel like they're actually wanting to do the deeper work to heal. That something that maybe what I communicate to the partner's guide of what I'm seeing. Like they're looks like they're checking the box. I think it's truthful, but I can't fully tell. But I'm not seeing the behavioral truth adding, that they're actually trying to work on it. If they're kind of staying stuck as a victim in the story or a martyr, or they're not really shifting to take responsibility. I mean, that's the whole point, right? For the addict in this disclosure to then share and say, this is what I did, and you deserve the truth. This is the things I did and didn't do, in a as lovingly kind way as possible. So
Now that's the disclosure guide's work, right? On trying to sift out and get the best version of the truth possible that they can work with.
Yeah.
But then it also brings up the controversial topic of the polygraph that we
I
all
wonder if you're going to want to go there.
have to, because everyone wants to know about the polygraph. Because there's the thing: is it 100%? Because the partner always wants to know, like, is this really
Yeah.
going to work? And then the other part, you know, if I have to pull out a polygraph, do I have to really be a detective when in my relationship? Like, is a polygraph necessary? And I know you guys talk a little bit about polygraph in your
Mhm.
book. but just to hear your thoughts on
Yeah.
if we should be doing a polygraph or not.
Well, I'll just say that for the partner, I always go back to choice. Let's inform ourselves about the pros and cons of that, and let it be the partner's choice if it's an informed one. Right. The types of partners who are attracted to me in my practice are polygraph gals. So, and I would say I stand in that camp myself. No, it's not 100%. It's not 100% accurate. There are all kinds of kind of things that can, um, that can influence that. But it's probably still more accurate than a human polygraph. If you don't have one, by default you become a human one, and it turns out we're not that really good with it either, with the success rate, and it's really hard to heal if you feel like you have to constantly be attuned to checking some things out. Um, I don't do very many disclosures where a polygraph is not involved with that, and I think they're really important because quite often, things can look really, really good. It can sound good in a document, um, but it allows the partner sometimes to put in some. I like to call them strategic questions. Maybe something she already knows.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways to sort of test the system. Um, but what I generally find is that the people who really are in recovery and have some good intent, um, who want yet fear and let things get in the way, over time, uh, that even they'll say polygraphs are helpful. I've worked with people who say that's kind of what taught me what truth is. And yes, that it is absolutely sad that you have to be in a marriage with a polygraph, but where you might need a polygraph to help you discern truth. But by not doing the polygraph, it doesn't mean that you're not in a marriage where you might need something else to help you discern truth. So I will go with whatever her wishes are. I mean, I do most of my disclosures with a female partner and a male addict. So I apologize for the use of maybe inappropriate pronouns. I'm just sharing my experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is worth saying that polygraphs are still controversial in our field. They just are. So you'll have people I've generally found on the APSAT side, the partner specialist side. I don't know if I've heard any negative views of polygraph, but definitely from some CSATs.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard it. So some people are very vocal anti-polygraph. So I think we have to own it. So if you're working with someone who you may be getting different views of what the polygraph is, what I found, like Janice said, they're not perfect. What are the meta studies, or what, 89% or something? I forgot what they're.
No, I think it was the meta studies, 87% success.
87.
Yeah.
So 87% successful. Now, what I've heard from the guy that we typically work with as an examiner, a lot of that does depend on the skill of the examiner and how they're, their experience. So unfortunately, it's not as. But anyway, 87%. That's not 100%, but that's still better than zero. I mean, I think what we often say is, if we don't do it, then it basically pushes the partner to accept the addict's word for it, which was part of the big problem to begin with, that their words were filled with lies and deception and betrayal. So what this does is it helps to validate the truth of what they're sharing, so that they're being honest. As another bonus, I've just seen on the addict side, the addicts tend to do more, I'll just say, thorough investigation. Their disclosure documents seem to just be more thought through. They don't just, it's not half-hearted. Sometimes things come out right before the polygraph, and that's not uncommon. Like we share this all the time to partners. It's not atypical that there is a piece of information or several things that the person says, they either remembered the morning of or something, or I don't know, were they going to withhold it? Were they going to keep it? Or I just found that they've actually been more helpful.
Yeah.
And then what I've seen on the addict side, if you're willing to do it, even if you're scared and even if you don't understand it, you demonstrate the not just the content of a past polygraph, but the behavioral truth that you're willing to do whatever it takes to help your partner and say, if your safety is important, I've eroded your safety through my deception and through my actions. And if this is something that I can do that will help you start to build a new foundation of honesty in the relationship, I'm willing to do it, which does translate actually as, okay, they're willing to do it. And that means something.
And maybe a consumer tip. Polygraphs it's a state by state thing. Like some states don't really use them, some states do, but they're not regulated. So I happen to be in Texas, which is the polygraph examiners are monitored. There is oversight in some states. So there's some standards with that. And Texas just happens to have very good polygraph examiners. Some of the things that we heard about in our survey is people finding people off the internet with no vetting of the examiner. Somebody who works a criminal polygraph is not the same thing as a fidelity polygraph. And part of, if a partner is going to wants a polygraph, we have to do it with wisdom, with knowledge, which is polygraph is a measure of somebody speaking truth or not. It's not a memory test. If somebody really doesn't remember something, then they'll say no and they'll pass the polygraph because they didn't remember it. But we those of us who do them know, do disclosures, know that it's not uncommon in the days, weeks, and months after a disclosure for it to start the uncorking. It takes the cork out of that compartment that so many things have been stuffed into. So it's not uncommon for more disclosures to come, but that's really different than lying about that. So, yeah.
And you mentioned consumer tip, which I'm happy you brought that up because this whole thing can get pretty expensive, right? You have 1 to 2 therapists. Maybe we're doing disclosure intensive where it's the whole weekend you're paying for. Maybe now we have the polygraph added to it. If you're doing it with your therapist, maybe now there's extra sessions. They're paying for their time outside of session. So that brings the question of, is disclosure like a luxury for those that can afford it?
That's a great question. Hopefully, no. I mean, what we've tried to do is, and we're working on actually some more options that will have more, I guess, tiers of support. So first of all, we wrote these books directly for clients, for consumers to work through, not to be done solo. We do want to have a guide working through it, but I found if someone, for example, with a disclosure document, if someone really does follow the 10-step guide that we put together, it will streamline, hours of time that someone would have to just be saying this or reading a document. So we've hopefully streamlined some of that extra expense. We have a number. So in our KintsugiRecoveryPartners.com, we've trained a number of disclosure guides. We have, there's therapists, but we also have a number of wonderful coaches that are available too. So there's different levels of people support. I hope it's not just a luxury. We're trying to also get other resources that people can, that will help cut down some of the costs. What I do know is, and I even hate to say it, whatever it is, if it luxury or not, it's going to be cheaper than divorce. And we know when couples are at this place, it's at a pretty dire place in their relationship. And we found sometimes if we don't stop the hemorrhaging, like people sometimes are ending up in couples therapy, or they're ending up in long-term work, and they will keep doing the work but still stay stalled because we don't actually have a foundation we're building from. So it might feel more expensive in the moment, but hopefully this can really catapult some of the healing and recovery moving forward.
And I'll maybe add to that, and maybe for the consumer's sake, add the secondary domain name. That's probably going to be a whole lot easier to spell than Kintsugi Recovery Partners. Just do disclosureguide.com and you'll get to that. But generally speaking, coaches are less expensive than therapists, unless it's a coach who's also a therapist, right? So there are ways of doing that. The workbooks, the preparation, the more you can put into the preparation, the faster the process goes with that. there's still lots of people who live in areas where there's nobody who's trained. A remote with a really good, under the right conditions, I'm going to be cautious about that, right conditions, working with somebody who's a well-trained coach doing a remote disclosure, you know, can save lots and lots of money with that. I think we created for the workbooks, we created a process that if both guides are using that, it speeds things up because they're using the same script. And then we've even found that in the disclosure guide world, the certified disclosure guide world, that they're partnering up. There are guides who really, you know, work with somebody. They do it efficiently. The choreography is fantastic because they have the same instincts, and so they're sort of advertising themselves as a package deal. That somebody who's working with guides who've worked together and know that they're compatible, that also speeds things up a lot. And I also say too, and I, I don't know if this is controversial to say or not, but I'm also in the CSAT world, and I do expensive, intensive disclosures. Uh, um, but part of the reason that sometimes people come to me is because each of them maybe has a CSAT who are so busy, such a like busy practice that it can take weeks to coordinate on every call. And so the process of therapist scheduling for a meeting to try to work with, help with this process sometimes actually generates a tremendous amount of frustration. And then people feeling like they're spending weeks and weeks in therapy, probably months in therapy at this point, just with prepping for the disclosure that never gets to really go anywhere because of the guides, like with that. So sometimes, again, using really good, well-trained disclosure guides speeds up that process. So all of that time in therapy is now going to be used for recovery, for deeper, for restoring the relationship, for the phase that comes beyond truth. Truth is a starting point. It's not the ending.
And I like what you guys are doing at Kintsugi Recovery Partners is you're training so many different people at different levels. So it might be an associate that's also associate sex addiction therapist, which is going to be, more cost effective than if we're doing a CSAT. That's also a disclosure guide. So, and you gave a better than Kintsugi, so disclosure guide.com. So going there, you can have a plethora of different options, and hopefully after watching this episode, you have a lot of questions and you know how to pick a disclosure guide to help streamline this if finances is an issue. Thank you so much.
Can I say one more thing? Can I say they will find your face on find a certified guide. Yeah.
Yes, my face included amongst many other certified guides. Thank you so much for coming and answering all the questions that I hear all the time from addicts and partners and being so thoughtful and just, answering those fully. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kanifa.
And if you have not done so already, please make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And as always, embrace your healing journey. Every step forward brings a new hope for tomorrow. See you next time.